So I would like to welcome you to tonight's presentation, Spotlight on College, Finding Your Best Fit, presented by Kim Anderson. Kim is an experienced college counselor and one of the founders of Spotlight College Advising, an independent educational consulting firm that helps families navigate the journey to college with honesty, integrity, and personalized service. Kim has extensive experience working with students in our community from 9th to 12th grade. And so tonight, Kim is going to help walk us through the ins and outs of the considerations for finding your best college fit. And with that, Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks so much. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to make sure that you understand that we are going to stop about midpoint. I have to sort of watch my clock to do a Q&A. I'm not able to see the questions you put in the chat when I'm sharing my screen. So Susan will be sort of facilitating a Q&A midpoint and then at the end. So please know if you have questions to drop them in the chat because I'm happy to answer as many as I can in the time that we have. So without further ado, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I didn't want to interrupt, but it looks like it's a majority of juniors, a couple of sophomores, but mostly juniors.
Okay, perfect. All right, great. That helps me a lot. So thank you so much. All right, so let's jump in. The first, obviously college ahead. So for juniors, I would say you're under the 12-month marker at this point. So typically the students that I work with, we start working on college applications and essays and things like that the summer after junior year. So the seniors, Susan and I were just talking because she has a daughter who's a senior, November 1st is kind of a big day. There are a lot of early action deadlines that take place on November 1st. So many families that have students that are, planning and thinking about college don't realize that those dates come up pretty fast. Some of the Southern schools even have mid-October. So I had some students that had October 15th deadline. So college truly is just ahead for you juniors, and then the sophomores not too far down the pike. So tonight's focus is going to be on, finding the right college fit. So we're going to talk a little bit about size and the different types of colleges, sort of the categories that, we look at when we are talking to students about finding the right fit. We're going to talk about school selectivity because that's a really important element in terms of creating a balanced list. Highly selective admissions. We have a slide on a more selective school so you can understand from university's perspective, although sometimes when you hear these admission stats and it doesn't seem, it's difficult to get in, but you don't, it's not as horrible as you would think. And then if you really peel back sort of the layers of, the protected populations and things that what I would say the mission of the university, sometimes that can affect the numbers. The rankings we'll chat about a little bit and taking those with a grain of salt. Money, of course, because for the most part, I would say 1/3 of families pay full price for college, 2/3 do not, and kind of figuring out, I have a few, we could do a whole presentation on paying for college. So a few tips that I left in here for that. And then the final piece is about resources for you as you work to sort of start exploring and researching and building your list for college. So I guess juniors, I would say to you as we jump into this, understand that this is your journey and that your parents are there to support you and, obviously in any way, shape or form they can, but you need to own the process. So I hope that we have as many junior students as we do parents that are participating and then the sophomores as well. So, all right. So the first thing I wanted to do is just break down the types of colleges. So there's public colleges that are funded largely by tax dollars, so state and local tax dollars. And that becomes important as you start to build your list because public schools that are largely funded by the state government mainly give priority to the students that live in that state. So for example, if you lived in the state of Wisconsin, you're going to have a little easier time getting into some of the more selective state schools in Wisconsin than someone from Illinois. Illinois, unfortunately for us, and I assume everyone here lives in Illinois, But Illinois as a state is a little bit broke financially. So what happens at the University of Illinois is they don't always protect our students as much as, in my opinion, they should. And they end up giving away a lot of our student spots to out of state and international students because they pay, the international students pay double. So when we look at the the public colleges in other states, it can affect your ability to get in when you see an acceptance rate that is a blended acceptance rate. Private colleges, they don't have any state and government funding. They're strictly relying on, the tuition and fees that you pay. They are focused on, so when we talk about college, we talk about things in terms of total cost of attendance, which includes tuition, room and board, and other fees. So the private colleges, are really dependent on their alumni and different donors and things like that to a large extent on, to kind of add additional revenue to their bottom line. And I like to always point out, many people have a misconception that private colleges are going to be more expensive than public. And although the original sticker price might be higher, often these private colleges have a larger resources in terms of the endowments and institutional aid that they can provide to a family. So many times a private university through merit-based scholarship, some institutional aid, and if you qualify for need-based aid, that's a bonus. But those first two categories, they can actually get very close to being competitive with some of the public schools. So as you're building your list, I encourage you to explore both public and private colleges because they both are going to have different, advantages. And we'll talk a little bit about, size and public private in a minute. So there are, 2 and 4-year colleges. So the 2-year colleges offer typically an associate's degree or a certificate program. And then many of them, the College of DuPage, which is in our backyard, they offer some direct admit programs to some of the 4-year schools. So some of the certificate programs, you would just do the 2 years and go off and you're already in your intended, field of study. And then others, you might have a direct admit path. So I think that for some families, I love actually College of DuPage. I think we're so lucky to have it in our backyard. It is always in the top 10 matriculation for, I work with students throughout the Chicagoland area, but predominantly the western suburbs. It's in almost every top 10 list of every high school. And the reason it is because it provides a great value. And so you can start there. And if you do whatever degree you're seeking is a 4-year degree, you do your first 2 years at the 2-year college, getting your general education requirements completed, and then you have the ability to transfer to a 4-year university. So that said, it's critical that you meet the general education pathway requirements. So Pathway to Engineering is one of the more popular ones at COD. So they have a program where you can go for the first 2 years at COD and you have certain core class requirements and grade requirements, and then you get a direct admit to University of Illinois' engineering program, which is a top 10 in the nation. So it's really a very affordable way to approach it if you are someone that's willing to take the first 2 years and live at home. So, and then the other school 4-year university programs, are going to lead to a bachelor's degree. And we're going to talk a little bit about the differences between a university versus just a liberal arts college. So it's an important distinction. So I like families when they're building their list to be able to understand that it's good to have a variety of schools. So as you're figuring out your fit, so liberal arts colleges are typically smaller, and they're going to be focused on kind of providing a really broad-based academic perspective. So you're not necessarily going to go in and have a direct admit program to business or engineering or anything like that, but they're really focused on providing kind of critical thinking skills, helping you develop your ability to just be a very well-rounded student. Universities as a whole are typically larger. They offer more programs, more majors, just degree options in general. The a lot of the universities are going to be offering, they have within the university certain schools, they call them colleges. So if you look at University of Illinois, they're going to have different colleges, a liberal arts college, an engineering college, a business school, all of those things underneath that umbrella. So the university programs, we'll talk about sort of the pros and cons of some of these styles of schools in a few minutes, but many of these very large universities like University of Illinois, University of Wisconsin, they're state kind of flagships. So they are allocated a certain amount of federal money that is earmarked for research. So if you're someone that is very, very focused on research and you want to make sure that you have the ultimate opportunities, sometimes the larger tier 1 universities can be a really good type of school to put on your list. And I would encourage you to not just focus only on those types of universities, but that definitely they are going to be, they have a much larger research budget. I guess I'll say it that way. Community college, we already talked a little bit about, so I won't spend more time. And then the last thing here is just the technical and trade schools. So I know I have so many families that I talk to and they say, does everybody go to college? And the reality is that in our area, the western suburbs of Chicago, the large majority of students that I work with, I'm coming in contact with because they are four-year college bound, but there are amazing paths for you through technical and trade schools programs. I listed a few: dental hygiene, culinary arts, some of the trade schools where you can go in that 2 years and get a really marketable degree, come out with, no student debt or very limited student debt, and then kind of hit the ground running. So I always like to touch on that for people that aren't sure they're completely interested in a four-year opportunity. So as we talk about different types of colleges that are out there, one of the things that I like to highlight for families is if you are a student that's really focused on the arts, there are certain universities that offer more of a conservatory experience. And that is going to be, students that are interested in really spending a deep amount of time perfecting a craft, whether it be through dance or music or theater or something like that. So on the conservatory level, typically there are two different types of degrees. There's a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and that usually, I like to say to students, is more focused on your craft, right? So you're going to have about 2/3 of your classes, if you were on a BFA program, that are focused on that talent and art that you're pursuing. If you are going to go to that university, and you have the option in most of the universities to pick one or the other, then if you opt to do or pursue your art, but as a Bachelor of Arts degree, then it's sort of the ratio is flipped, and you have about 2/3 of your classes that are more liberal arts based classes. And then you have about 1/3 that will relate to your passion that you're pursuing. So I think the conservatories are usually, some are independent, many are housed within larger universities, but just know that there's two different kinds of degrees. So when you're building your list, you want to make sure that if you have, a preference, explore what the differences are for your particular talent between the BFA and the Bachelor of Arts, and understand, the type of school that might make sense for you. Next is, there's also single sex colleges. So the large majority of the schools in the US, there's almost 4,000 schools, are going to be co-ed. And there's some, though, that are specifically targeted at men or women. There's a lot more for women than there are for men in terms of the single sex. And I listed some of my favorites. Barnard, which is in New York, Wellesley is in Wellesley, Massachusetts, and Scripps is out in Claremont, California. So some of the men's ones are Wabash College, which is not too far from us in Indiana, and then Morehouse in Atlanta. So those, if you are a student that is open to having a single sex experience, can be amazing opportunities to really kind of flourish in a non-co-ed environment. And then the last one I like to highlight, just because it's important, is religious affiliated schools. So I like to say to students that, there are certain universities where religion is very predominant in how they approach everything that they do at the university. And then there are other schools where we call it like, I will joke sometimes with students, it's like religion light or Catholic light. So like a Marquette or DePaul locally, where they are Jesuit universities, they definitely have a religion requirement built in that you have to take a religion class, but they don't really require a lot of other things beyond that. There's some other schools, Olivet Nazarene down in Bourbonnais, not too far from here, is one that, is religious, and they have a chapel requirement. So they have some other, Pepperdine out in California. So there are some schools. So if you are someone that is religious, that's an element to explore to find out what the, not only the opportunities are for that, the clubs and activities, but sort of what the belief and foundation of the university is, can be helpful as you start to build your list. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about, this is size, right? So when I talk about schools in 3 categories, I have small, medium, and large. So small colleges to those of us in the business. Our students are a population of 5,000 or less undergraduates. So the undergraduate schools have the advantage of just smaller class sizes, a little bit better access to professors, rather than having a teaching assistant teaching your class. It's going to be a full-fledged professor who you're actually going to build a relationship with. At many of the smaller universities, the professors will invite students to dinner at their home. They have the opportunity to really get to know them. So I tell students, if you're thinking about this, sometimes students will say, oh, I don't want to go to any college that's smaller than my high school. And initially, I think as you're sort of starting to figure it out, that seems like a logical thing to say, but I really encourage you to explore some of the smaller, and the LAC is liberal arts colleges that we touched on liberal arts earlier, but explore some of the smaller colleges, because they really do an amazing job of just helping develop the whole human being, right? They're not pre-professional. They're not focused on when you come in, you're on an engineering track and this is your curriculum you need to be on for all 4 years, but they're really going to be looking to develop, all of the elements of who you are as an individual. So I list some of my favorites on here. Denison locally, and I say locally, but it's closer, Ohio. Illinois Wesleyan is the most local. Bowdoin out in Maine, Middlebury, Carleton just north of us in Minnesota, and then Williams College in Massachusetts is one of my favorites. So those universities are known for, all the things I'm talking about. Very, very high touch kind of model where your student is going to have the relationships they want to have with their professors. I tell students that are looking at potentially pursuing grad school, medical school, law school, part of the process is recommendations. And when you go to some of these very large universities, you really don't get to know your professors very well at all. So when it comes time to apply for a Fulbright scholarship or some of study abroad or any of the other opportunities that are going to come up as an undergraduate that require a recommendation, if you don't know who you would ask, that's a sign that you're not building the kind of connections you should be building with your professors in your day-to-day academic experience. So the next group is medium size. So those are public and private universities, 5,000 to 15,000. So medium size is kind of obviously like it sounds, right? It's sort of a bridge. You have a little bit more in terms of academic opportunities than you might have from a major, and the opportunities for clubs and activities are going to be a little bit bigger. Some of the medium-sized schools will have more of a liberal arts focus, where they'll come in, you don't come in with an identified major track, you come in for the first couple of years and you're taking sort of what they call their core curriculum. And so you are doing all of their core curriculum for 2 years, and then at the end of sophomore year, you're going to identify a track potentially that you're interested in pursuing from a major perspective. So it gives you, I think I tell students, the nice thing about medium-sized school is it just can give you a little bit more opportunity if you're somebody that is interested in really exploring a lot of different majors, and B, sometimes students feel like socially they're going to have more opportunities if there are more clubs and activities. So a medium-sized university, and I've listed some of them here, St. Louis University down in St. Louis, Northeastern out in Boston, it's a good one, University of Dayton in Ohio, Butler in Indiana, and then locally here in Northwestern kind of falls in that category. So I tried to touch on in some of the examples, like varying levels. We'll talk in a little bit about selectivity, but I think that it's important to, have some examples at all levels of selectivity. All right, and then these are large advantages of kind of the public, and there are some large private universities as well. NYU is the largest private university, in New York University out in Manhattan. So, but the scope of these large universities is going to be very large classes, particularly your first couple of years that you're in college. So a lot of the general education classes will be in large lecture halls where you have a professor that lectures probably once a week. And then it's such a big group that there will be breakout sessions after for the other, let's say class meets 3 days a week. The professor, who largely is there as the brilliant mind to develop the curriculum, is then going to not be at the other two sessions. The other two sessions are going to be led by teaching assistants who are typically grad school students, sometimes seniors, and those become a very big part, I guess, of that educational experience your first 2 years at many of these larger universities. Like I touched on earlier, there's a lot of research opportunities because they have a lot of spend that they can put toward that. As you get up into your major classes, the junior, senior year, definitely the class sizes are going to shrink. So I find at a lot of the larger universities that there will be almost like weed out classes. They sort of know their numbers and what they want to get to for certain majors every year. And so they have some of the classes that are sort of the famous for being sort of the weed out classes. But I tell students when you're evaluating, some students will say, I don't want to consider any large schools at all. And I at least encourage them to go and tour a few, because you always have the ability to make a large university small. So whether that be through, clubs and activities that you participate in, many of the larger universities and medium size as well offer honors college programs. So that is sort of something that when you actually apply to college, you can check a box on the application. Yes, I'd like to be considered for the honors college. And you might have to write an additional essay and do some work, but that honors college often is housed in the same dorm. So that sort of can become a smaller group in the larger university. And then a lot of the schools, as of the last 10 years, have come up with these living learning communities that can be really fun. So they are tied sometimes to major interests, sometimes to things that you're passionate about from a extracurricular perspective. So you have the ability to sort of make that university a little bit smaller by going in and finding out what some of the living opportunities are. And you might then meet all of your friends there. But in class, I would say from a meeting and socializing perspective at the larger universities, it's probably not going to happen during your classes just because there's so little time for interaction. Okay, then kind of finding the right fit. So when we look at fit, we focus on sort of fit in 3 categories. So the first category that we talk to students about is finding the right academic fit. So, one of the things that you can do, and there's lots of different websites, depending on your high school and the counseling department, they will also do some things with finding like major career paths. So if you're somebody that has always known what you want to do, that is a little bit easier. Other times it might require some exploration, but identifying what you're interested in pursuing can be helpful sometimes in figuring out what schools make the most sense as you start to build your list. The rigor of curriculum becomes really important. Understanding that let's say you might be in the top 5 or 10% at your high school. If you are going to go to a university where everybody was in the top 5 or 10% at their high school, it's going to be a pretty intense academic environment. I was telling Susan before we started, I had a student that was very focused on Carnegie Mellon, which is in Pennsylvania, very, very wonderful school. And he really had not been there. And when he actually went there and toured, although he's a very strong student, he felt like it was too intense and he felt as though he would not thrive there. So that's why throughout this process, I'm going to continuously come back to this theme of visiting the colleges. Virtual visits are great. And that was a silver lining of COVID and when no one could do anything else. But I think the reality is if you can get on some campuses, and even if you are staying in the Chicago area and you go around, you can obviously tour big public. When I say Chicago, I'm saying like a 2-hour radius of Chicago, right? Hitting sort of the big publics, the small and medium-sized privates. You can start to get a sense of what feels right. And I'll touch on it a little bit, some things that you can then use to take that data nationally a little bit more. Admission selectivity we'll talk about in a different slide in more detail, but understanding that colleges have different sort of admission criteria in terms of what they're looking for and how selective it might be for you. Student faculty ratio obviously is a key detail in understanding fit. When we talked earlier about the small, medium, large scenarios, right? If you're somebody that is going to thrive in an smaller learning environment, then potentially the large schools wouldn't be even, something that you'd entertain. And then the bottom one is about support, right? So support if you have an individualized education plan or a 504 plan, anything that is currently in place in high school does not carry on over to college. So it's very, very important for you to understand that. So there are colleges that offer some academic support and you have to set that all up, after you graduate from high school, but you want to explore that as you're visiting schools and on their websites and understanding what their learning accommodations are. So every university has a plan. Some are better than others. And then there are some universities, University of Denver is a great, University of Arizona has the SALT program, which is another one where you actually pay additional fees on top of your tuition. And it's a more intense level of support for your students. So if your child is someone that would benefit from that additional academic support, it's really important to, as you're building your list, to take that into consideration because the colleges are not really designed for providing that support. They really, I would say the large majority of the schools have very limited support. So you want to make sure you're identifying schools that offer the strong support. And then you're obviously going to need to make sure you have the plan in place with your IEP or 504 at the college level. So, and then the second, so we talk about 3 legs of the stool. The second piece is financial fit. When I mentioned earlier, we were talking about COA. So whenever you see universities put numbers out, it drives me crazy. It is always they publish their tuition cost. And the reality is like, you're not living on the street. You have to pay for housing. So when you look at even if you're Googling around, look at total cost of attendance. That is the most important number that you want to focus on because the reality is that there's going to be other fees and things on top of housing that you are going to be responsible for. And if it's a university that is on the other side of the country, you have to make sure that the travel costs are included within your budget. So, and they can't always factor that in, obviously, on the website because everyone's coming from different locations, but you personally should factor in the travel costs. Scholarship potential is huge. So when we talk about selectivity tiers, I tell students that if you are a top student, you could potentially qualify and be accepted to some of these very selective schools, but most of those schools, everybody is very bright. So you are not going to get scholarships. None of the Ivy League does not give merit scholarships. Most of the schools in the top 20 from a ranking perspective are very stingy about scholarship money. They are very generous if you have need-based financial need, and they will back up the truck to help you out. But from a scholarship potential, focusing on schools where you are in the top 20% can be what you will get offered, what's called like a preferential package. So if you are somebody that is in the top 20% of that university's profile, And you can look on their website and get an idea of what their mid 50% GPA looks like, what their mid 50% ACT or SAT look like. And there's obviously, I'll touch on, there's more things that they're going to consider, but you have the ability then to be understanding where you're going to be a top tier student, where you would be sort of a catch for them. And then they're going to reward you through merit scholarships. AP acceptance policy is huge to be evaluating that. I think often students lose sight of the fact that there's two reasons that students take AP classes, obviously, is to demonstrate their intensity of their curriculum and their rigor. And so for the more selective schools, you need to do that to gain acceptance, but they are not going to, in most cases, give you credit for any of those classes. They want you to take the full 4 years at their university. So if you are somebody that's very focused on cost, you typically are going to be looking to universities that are going to have a generous AP acceptance policy. So for the most part, the public universities are better at taking those, AP classes, but don't assume that. You always just want to, on their website, explore what the university's AP acceptance policy is. Those are scored on a scale of 0 to 5, the AP exams that you take at the end of the year that you had the class. And for most of the selective schools, they want to see a 4 or 5 to kind of bolster your application. For the universities that are going to take the credit, usually if you score a 3 or higher, it will qualify you or elevate you up above one of the entry-level classes. So the AP policy can be very important in terms of keeping your total costs down. I have students that are focused on cost, and they will shave off a whole year by applying all those AP credits against the schools that we, have on their list. First year retention rate is one of the stats I talk a lot about, and it's really designed, it is essentially the number of freshmen that come back sophomore year is retention rate. And so the universities typically retention rate of 85% or more is considered strong. The retention rates that are below that, sometimes there's things that are explainable. Indiana University a few years ago had a huge mold issue in their dorms, and they were putting students in hotels, and it became a little crazy. They lost a lot of students that year. So I think there's things that'll happen, but in general, if a university is strong, doing a good job of engaging their freshmen, helping them make sure they're getting the classes they need to get to be able to register, the retention rate should be high. So that's when something, again, you can Google. I'm going to give you some resources at the end that, you can look at that'll give some of the stats that I'm talking about as well. Average student loan debt is a big one. So again, loans, financial aid, that could be a whole separate presentation, but essentially it's about your student can get up to $31,000 in federal loans over the course of their 4 years. So based on how expensive college is these days, that doesn't really do much, right? It comes out to be a little under $7,000 for, each year has a different rate, but let's say it's around $7,000 or $8,000. So beyond that, as you're putting together your budget, if you know that your student is going to have some skin in the game with the loan, which I encourage, or maybe they have some savings, then you have to figure out what your budget would be beyond that. So what happens a lot of times is there's a gap. So a university might say, we're going to give you a certain amount of institutional aid or need-based aid, or then maybe you're going to have a scholarship, a merit-based scholarship that'll go on top of that. But if there's still a gap, then there's something called Parent Plus loans. So we encourage families to understand all that on the front end, because the colleges don't do a really good job about explaining all of that. And honestly, it's so easy to sign up for these loans that I don't think people even understand it. There's $1.6 trillion in Parent Plus loans right now out there. And I think half of them are in default because people are getting in over their head and applying to colleges that they shouldn't. And I like to use the housing analogy when we talk about this. So you kind of think about what you've saved for college and what your budget is. And if you have a budget that is, let's say, if you're shopping for a house and you have a budget for a $200,000 house, you shouldn't be looking in the $500,000 and $1 million houses, because those universities are going to look amazing, right? Or those houses are going to look amazing. So it's important to understand as a family what your budget is. Make sure your students understand what that is. So as you're building your list, you are not putting schools on there that are not going to be generous with need-based or financial or merit-based aid, depending on, what category you're in, and that you can graduate with minimal student loan debt. And then remembering it's the long haul. So a lot of students will go on to graduate school or medical school or law school. So when I'm meeting with a student that's a freshman or a sophomore or a junior, and we're talking about sort of what's the long game? And if you are someone that thinks that you're going to be going on to one of those higher ed pursuits, you really want to make sure you understand what the total cost is going to be. And if you can get out of undergrad, going to a school where it's a less selective school that's going to essentially pay you to go there, that can be a very desirable thing to, go shoot for. And then the last leg in terms of fit for us is social fit. And that's always the fun one when, students go and tour, right? It's how big, how far, do you care if it's public or private? And we touched on the religious element earlier. Greek life is essentially the fraternity system. So there's probably half of the universities offer Greek life in some way, shape, or form. You can get a sense through some of the research items I'll recommend at the end is how big that is in terms of their, percentage of their population. And then sports culture. Some students, are very focused on being able to go to football or basketball or hockey games on the weekends at their university. And other people don't, know a field goal from pick another sport, a hockey goal. So it really is important to understand how that drives your decision. I think sometimes parents get names that are on ESPN, or students get names that are on ESPN on, sports day. And I just say, don't just focus on schools that have big sports programs, because I think there's so many universities out there and they offer a lot of other activities that can be very valuable. And then last piece is diversity, right? So I think all the schools will publish their diversity statistics, and you have the ability to go on and, people come, and when I talk to them, it's sort of what their goals are in terms of that. Some people are very interested in attending university that's very diverse. Some it's less of a priority, but I do think that that's an element that you should consider when you're building your list, because the diversity piece can be very, very different at the schools, the various schools that you're going to be considering. So Susan, I'm going to pause for a second because I just saw the time is 7:40. Is there any questions that I should address right now?
I have had no questions in chat. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask? You can either type it in chat or type it in the Q&A.
Yeah, I'll keep going, but if they pop up, just interrupt me, because otherwise we'll probably run out of time. So,
Sure.
All right. So this is in terms of building your list. We talk about school selectivity, and essentially we have 4 tiers of selectivity. We talk about schools that are the least selective schools. And I like to say out of the gate, all the schools on this list are amazing institutions. We have very much the philosophy that it's not where you go to school, it's what you do with it. So we really just give examples like this to help students understand when we're talking about building a balanced list, what that means. So from our perspective, the schools that are less selective, they're accepting the large majority of their applicants is, we have University of Kansas, Illinois State, Michigan State, University of Iowa is on there, but then this is a good chance to say that some universities are more selective for certain majors. So University of Iowa is less selective as a whole, but for nursing, it's very competitive. It's a direct admit program. And if that's your path that you're interested in pursuing, you want to make sure you understand what the cut score requirements are and what the averages are. But those students that are, getting into these schools that are less selective schools can be a wide variety. I like to equate it to when you're on a flight going somewhere. Everybody's sort of could have paid a different price for their ticket. And it's sort of the same at college, because if you're someone that's on the top end of their curve, they might have given you that preferential package. And if you're someone that really didn't apply themselves as well as you should have in high school, you might feel fortunate for University of Iowa or one of these schools to even accept you. So the profile of the students that are, kind of the target for these less selective schools are students that probably have mainly B's. They might have a few C's, the occasional D on their transcript. University of Iowa has something called the Regency Index, where you can actually calculate based on your grades and your test score when you have a standardized test score. And then they look at how you've done in terms of fulfilling your core requirement, your core for academics. So math, science, English, and social studies. They don't care if they're AP or honors, but they want to know that you took 4 core classes all 4 years. So some students look at their high school's graduation requirements that say, oh, I only need 2 years of social studies. I'm going to like jump and do something else, which, you know, ceramics might be great. And there might be some other fun classes out there. But the reality is that colleges, the 4-year bound colleges, are looking for students that are staying engaged in their core curriculum. So please know that out of the gate. Next category, the selective schools are accepting about half to a little better than half of their students. There's some examples up there, right? DePaul, Marquette, Miami of Ohio. So these schools are, you know, I would say the majority, it's like a mix of A's and B's. You might have the occasional C. You're going to have test scores, or I'm not even going to throw out some numbers because the test scores are kind of in tandem with your GPA and the rest of your application package. But these selective schools are, you know, again, very much interested in educating the large majority of the students that apply. And all the students that go there are going to have amazing academic experiences. When we jump to, I'm going to skip highly selective for a minute because it's easier to back in the other way. So the most selective schools, so at the bottom, we're talking like the Ivies, Northwestern, WashU, U Chicago, all those folks. I consider those almost like wild card schools, lottery schools. So the students that are considering those schools, when they're building out their list, I say, put 1 or 2 of those on your list, but please know they're expecting academic perfection. They're expecting straight A's, maybe a B. They're expecting very high test scores. And again, you can look at what their mid 50% is. For perspective, like Northwestern, the top ACT score, if you haven't gotten into any of the testing yet, is a 36. The average, the mid 50% for Northwestern is a 33 to a 35. That's the mid 50%. So that basically tells you, in order to even be considered at that university, have to be, from an academic perspective, perfect, near perfect. And then, you know, I'll talk in a minute about the other things that students do to enhance their application, but that's just to get them to look at you. So then if you look in the category just below that of highly selectives, that's sort of the students that have that academic perfection. They might have a couple more B's. They might not have as large of a standout. They might not have as high of a test score, but still incredibly competitive. And like University of Illinois, I mentioned engineering and computer science, both those programs are in the top 10 in the nation. So for students coming out of this Chicagoland area, it is definitely a most selective school for those majors. The major can make a very big difference. So you have to understand that when you're building your list. Also, the OOS by University of Wisconsin on the highly selective category is out of state. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but those big public universities are giving preference to their out-of-state their in-state applicants. And so they are going to, the out-of-state students are going to have to pass a higher threshold in terms of what their GPA looks like, what their test scores look like, what's their extracurriculars look like. The University of California system, which is a really popular one out of this market, a lot of the students like to apply. They actually just released about a month ago an article after the last admission cycle saying, we are going to be restricting even more the numbers of spots that we give to out-of-state students because our in-state students that are incredible are not getting into any of our UC schools. So when students are from, you know, Illinois and the students I work with, putting those schools on their list, those become almost like a most selective school. So it's sort of understanding that piece is important in the mix. All right, so how many colleges, and then I like to talk a little bit about what your student is going to be evaluated on. So let's go through the evaluation first. So we talked about grades and rigor. So are you taking the most rigorous curriculum that's available at your high school? The university has a regional admissions rep that is responsible for not only reviewing the applications that come from your high school, but understanding the profile of your high school. So there's something called, depending on your high school, you can Google your high school's name. So a lot of kids, Hinsdale Central in this area, Hinsdale Central high school profile, pull it up, see what it looks like, see where your GPA falls, because that's the kind of stuff they're looking at. It'll show what are the total number of AP classes that are offered at your high school and how engaged are you in taking that AP level curriculum. So for students that are on the younger side, there's regular level classes. There's honor level, which is going to give you, a slightly more rigorous path. And then AP level classes are actually college level classes. So you have the ability, those are the ones that you'll get college credit for. You have the ability to show that you're proficient in taking a large percentage. Standardized test scores, we are sort of in a flux on this right now. COVID forced most of the universities, other than the public universities in Florida, went test optional. This year, we're seeing for the class of 2022 that are applying now, about a third of the universities have already flipped back because they realize that it's impossible. If you're a university that gets 50, 60, 70,000 applications, I think the most was UCLA last year at 105,000 applications. You have no way to analyze that many applications. So they really need data points to be able to figure that out. Use the UC system, which is UCLA and UC Santa Barbara and all those folks are coming up with their own tests for their in-state applicants is their plan. I don't know what that means for us, those of us that are out of state, but stay tuned on test scores. But yes, definitely an important factor. Extracurricular activities. That was what I was touching on earlier about the selectivity level of the schools. So the first two, if you're looking at those lottery schools, it's kind of a given that you've got everything sort of top notch there. And then what else do you have going on? The activity list, which is part of the Common App, the main application platform for college, has you list the 10 activities that you've been involved in throughout your high school experience, in school, out of school, jobs, volunteer work, depth of involvement, hours per week, weeks per year. You want to make sure that you're engaged in your school community and your where you live. Essays is a big piece of that. I won't go into a lot of detail, but there's school-specific essays in general. And then letters of recommendation from junior year core academic teachers. Demonstrated interest is a piece that is important to understand. The universities are big businesses, even though they're nonprofits. So they want to be able to understand who is most interested in their university. So when you're building your list and starting to narrow down who you're most interested in, you want to make sure you're letting them know that you're interested. So that's a virtual tour, an in-person tour, reaching out to the regional admissions rep, reading the emails, signing up for their mailing list, reading what they send you, clicking on the links. They're tracking all of it. Some universities use it more than others. And I will tell you, even the universities that tell you they don't use it, they track it. So for them, it allows them to, if they have a limited number of spots, give those spots to the people that they feel like are really going to be more likely to come. There's a lot more, sorry. And then interviews and standout factor is sort of the extra something that you can do for those more selective schools or the lottery schools to help improve your odds of admission. So when we go, if I go back to, no, it's going to take too long to go back, but the selectivity tiers that we talked about, as we evaluate all of these elements of a student's application, we're going to be essentially, the average student that I work with applies to about 10 schools, 8 to 12 is kind of the range. So 10 schools, and I say, if you're going to do 10 schools, I want to have, you can do one of the lottery schools, or you can do a few of the lottery schools or the wild card schools if you want. But then let's do 3 reach schools, 3 target schools, and 3 likely schools, which are like safety schools, sort of based on the percentages. So that's how we balance it out, just to make sure that the student is going to have a chance to have good options for admission and for merit scholarship or institutional aid. This one I'm going to go through quick. I'm running a little late, but this is just to understand each university has different corporate missions. So Notre Dame, this is fun from their class, the class of 2024. So the high school graduating 2020s. So, they had 21,000 applications. And of that, 75% of the students were academically qualified, meaning grades, test scores, all of that. So crazy kind of number, right, to think about. Then of that, they accepted only 4,000 of those 21,000 applications. And it's important to understand that from that 4,000, there's a little carve out to the right. They have their own institutional goals. So first generation students are students whose parents did not go to college. Low socioeconomic, there are people that there's something called the Pell Grant. So it's families that are typically making $60,000 a year or less. So that's 17% of their population. They then have legacy, which is if a parent went to that university. Notre Dame is still one of the schools that really focuses on legacy. A lot of the other universities have gotten away from it. And then athletic recruiting. So if you add up those three categories, that it's 46%, and that is carved out of that number. So although they're enrolling 2,200 students, they've already given away almost half the spots. So then when you look at that, the other element on the left is understanding that from the spots that remain, they're looking for geographic diversity, they're looking for racial diversity, they're looking for a lot of other things. So from that, it's like a very small percentage of students that are actually going to be out of the Midwest. So the Midwest represents like 8 states. And I forgot the number. I think I researched it at one point. It's something like, 15,000 high schools. So some students think, oh, but I was the valedictorian, or, oh, I'm in the top 10%. The reality is when you're at these super selective, the lottery type schools, just understand that it's important to have balance. And that's why, because you see how the numbers actually play out, that you could be very qualified and have done everything right. And it has nothing to do with you. It's based largely on what the school's and institutional goals are. All right, Susan, I'm assuming no questions. So jump in if anything comes through. I know I'm talking super fast, so how am I doing on time? All right, so I'm going to click through. This slide is just for perspective. We have a different presentation we do that is all about, how to improve your odds of acceptance. And I just like to show people, so it's 1990 is the top yellow compared to 2020. In the number of applications, the acceptance rates, it's just gotten incredibly competitive to get in. BC is Boston College. We have Harvard, we have Notre Dame, and then the one on the right is USC. And so I explain to families that it's really important to understand where the numbers are at and where the acceptance percentages are at as you work to build a balanced list. So numbers change. A lot of parents went back to college in a time when it was a lot easier to get into many of these schools. USC, one of my partners is based in California for Spotlight, and she said USC used to be a safety school for most of her students when she started working 15 or 20 years ago. So the numbers change, understand what the acceptance percentages are and what the caveats are that can make a difference for you. Quickly, some of the stuff driving and making these numbers, there's twice the number of applicants, right? 3 times the number of international students. Their Common App exploded when it went electronic, sort of in the mid to late 90s. So you can apply to up to 20 schools at one time. So that's increased the numbers. And then the reality is the colleges are wanting to drive up their numbers so they look more selective. So even though you as a student, or you have no chance of getting into their university, they're going to send you emails and make it really, really enticing for you to apply. You're going to get a lot of stuff in the mail. For juniors, once your so you took the PSAT last week on the 13th, once your PSAT scores come in, you're going to start getting flooded. Your mailbox, your email box and your home mailbox just with marketing material. Please be thoughtful and look at it. Just because they're sending it to you does not mean that you are qualified. They really just want you to apply, because the more applications they get, the more students they can deny, the more exclusive they look, and it kind of plays into some other things. So the rankings one. So I say to students, look at fit over rankings. People very much focus on the rankings, and it's okay to know what the rankings are, but understand that the rankings, there's different ways people rank it. The US News is the one people talk about the most on the left. And, only 35% of their ranking is coming from actual student outcomes, right? They're looking at faculty research, expert opinion, which is Harvard telling Yale they're amazing. And so there's all these kinds of things that go on with the rankings, and just understand that they should be one data point for you. Wall Street Journal's rankings, I personally like a little bit better. I feel like they have a higher, in terms of the outcome, but some of the other things that alumni giving and, things that our US News considers, the alumni can give $10, and it is, I don't know where everyone went to college, but you get these things in the mail and they really just want you to donate something because it increases their percentage, which actually ties to their ranking. So take it with a grain of salt. College has gotten so expensive right through the years. So again, we have some stats here looking at some of the schools that what it was 1990 to today. So when we talk about the financial fit earlier, I think it's super important to understand a lot of times students will come in that I'm meeting with and have, some dream schools in mind. And when we have software that we work with that I show them, when they see how expensive some of these schools are, they're blown away. So do the math. There is definitely, like I said earlier, about a third of the people that are going to pay full price for college. And that is usually the students that are looking at the most selective universities that do not have any financial needs. So those people are going to be paying sticker price. And so this $75,000, and these are 2020, every year tuition goes up about 3%, which sounds small until you put it on this is including room and board. So let's say their tuition is $55,000. It's a big ticket increase every year. So be thoughtful about the financial piece of it when you put your budget together. Scholarships, I left this in because I think this is really so important for families to understand. And this is, when I talked earlier about merit-based scholarships, a lot of people in this community are not going to qualify, or this area of Chicago, for need-based aid. So merit scholarships become really important to understand. With COVID and a lot of the schools going test optional, some of the test scores are a little, what I would say, more soft, but this gives you a general idea. So the top score on an ACT is 36, and Miami of Ohio, which is a great school, if you get a 33 ACT and a 3.5 GPA, it's 80,000. So 20,000 over 4 years, roughly that. Every year they can reevaluate their stats. Then if you drop down your ACT 3 points, you get $24,000 less with the same GPA. So I tell families, understand what the drivers are. Testing right now is sort of in the wild, wild west flux. So they may want it. Miami of Ohio, for example, has a really strong business school, the Farmer School of Business. Miami of Ohio says they're test optional for this year because of COVID and inability for everyone to feel comfortable testing. But if you're interested in a direct admit to their School of Business, you need to at least demonstrate you've got a 26 to get a direct admit to their business school. So schools will say they're test optional, but then require scores for other things, direct admit programs. Alabama has been a big one, and through the years, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, they will give full rides to some students. 30 ACT and 3.5 GPA is 72,000. That's over 4 years. And then your ACT drops a point and, drops significantly in terms of the offering. So understand what the requirements are. If you are a student that is a strong test taker and can do well on these tests without any kind of Khan Academy, or Susan mentioned doing some of the things like Nurturing Wisdom, doing the practice test, that's huge because it can really pay off in terms of some of the merit scholarships. Hope College is one in Michigan that I like in terms of one of the smaller liberal arts colleges, and they're offering 44,000, 26 ACT and 3.6 GPA, and then drop down a few points and it drops down 4,000. So be cognizant of that. Know that this is a good way when you're building your list to kind of stay within the budget. Then money. This is just sort of perspective, right? So this is what I talked about earlier, the preferential package. If you have a student that has a 32 ACT and a 4.0, University of Dayton will give them 102,000 over 4 years. And the same exact stats at a different school, Villanova, that's more selective, gets you 0. So understanding where your student can kind of receive that preferential package and be a top student is important when you're building your list. And those would be the likely schools, the higher profiles, the higher grades and GPAs at the more likely schools is where you're going to be getting the preferential opportunities. University of Kansas, 67,000 for a 30 ACT and a 375, and University of Illinois gives nothing. So University of Illinois has virtually almost no merit scholarship opportunities other than some really extreme examples, but they do offer something called the Aim High Grant that was instituted a couple of years ago. Google it, there are some income phase outs. But it's high, it's fairly high. I want to say for a family of 4, you can make up to $185,000 and still qualify. It's $5,000 a year. You have certain, they want to have the top students staying in state. That's the incentive why it was created. So they were losing a lot of students. Illinois was number 2 behind only New Jersey in terms of the number of students that were going to university in a different state. So be cognizant. And then last one is Kentucky versus Clemson. Kentucky is going to give 40 and Clemson 0 for the same stats. So that's that. Other ways to save money. We talked about scholarships, merit, private, local. Hit up if juniors this spring, when you are thinking about all the things you just want to get out of school. Starting in about February, the guidance office for seniors is going to have their scholarship list that's posted. Go take a look, see what that is, see what the requirements are. Some of them have service hour requirements and things that you may need a year to actually do. It's my next point, dropping down the selectivity tier to get the merit money we talked about. Midwest Student Exchange is sort of a reciprocity program with some of the mid-tier. So like a University of Wisconsin, Whitewater, University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, you would be able to pay about 125% of in-state as an out-of-state. So there's some states, Google Midwest Student Exchange, you can get a sense of that. There are a few tax credits that have American Opportunity and Lifetime Learning Credit that have some income phase outs, but be aware, these are all things. Community college we talked about earlier as a great cost saving. Graduating in 4 years is huge because the average National Department of Education stat is 5.8 years, which is crazy if you think about the cost of college. And then becoming an RA, which is like it's like the dorm police, right? The person that's sort of overseeing to make sure everything stays good. And then AP scores we touched on. So last slide is just for you guys. And if you wanted to take a picture or screenshot it, these are resources that I find to be beneficial as you are looking to build your list. So you might be researching on these. It might allow you. So Niche is like a great website that, has a lot of different overviews and statistics and some of the rankings. And I'm fine if you know the rankings, as long as that's not all you're looking at. College Express lets you build an actual list kind of based on some profile things. FIST Guide, the third bullet point, is a book that you can order from Target or Barnes & Noble. Great. It's about 3 or 4 inches thick, but it gives you an overview of about 600 colleges. And it tells you, the thing I like about it is it really tells you like what it feels like to be a student on that campus. And you have the ability then on that to look if it's a school you've gone to that you really liked. It'll say, if you liked this school, these are 5 other schools that you would like as well that are similar. Unigo is student reviews, which is fun and good to get the student perspective. Campus Real is virtual campus tours. All the school websites also have virtual campus tours, but this Campus Real one is sort of like student done, where they're filming it and it's not some drone that's kind of filming it at a high level. CapEx is great. Know that some of these, so like Niche and CapEx and who else? I would just say you might want to create a separate email because some of these folks sell their information. That's how they can be free. So I tell families, be smart about it. So create like a fake email account that you guys are going to use for things you don't care about because they're going to sell it and it's going to get a bunch of junk mail. But and then last 2 things, College Match book is a fun book. Steve Antonoff is one of, I don't know him personally, but he's in my space, independent educational consultant. He has a book that has a self-survey that helps you check kind of what's important to you, and then pathway to sort of figuring out some list building from there. And last thing is Naviance. And for those of you that have it offered at your high school, that has a list building feature in there that can be a little bit helpful just in the starting phases, like as you're starting to sort of think about it. It has your, at least your GPA is in there, and you can put in some very general list parameters. So I think that's a good place to start. And if you are a sophomore or a junior and you have Naviance, or you don't know, reach out to your counselor, because likely you have it. The high schools do not do a great job of promoting that you have access to that. It has scattergrams showing the students that got in at all these different universities, specifically from your high school, what their has like grades and test scores, and then it's like a X and Y axis. So you can see the green check marks are the people that got in, the red is who got denied. And usually there'll be an outlier, which we assume is somebody that has either legacy, a athlete, some kind of preference that the university wants. But for the most part, you'll see where the stats are kind of falling. So, and that's it. That's me. Spotlight, we're independent educational consultant, like Susan mentioned. So we just really appreciate the opportunity, love partnering with Hinsdale Library. This is our, Susan, I think third or fourth time we've kind of worked with you on different presentations, and we appreciate the opportunity. So we are just like Susan said in the beginning, we're about custom personalized approach. We are not like, there's some people that are sort of the big, funnel you in and do these massive workshops. And so it's one-on-one. So that's it. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now. Hopefully I didn't go so far over. Where am I at? Eight, 10.
We do have a couple. First of all, we have the Fisk College Guide at the library. So feel free to check. If you don't want to buy it, just come in and use it. We do have a question. For grad school and future jobs, is it better to go to a selective school and get mostly A's, or to go to a most selective school and get a little lower GPA?
I would say the first, because they are, if you think about it from a competitive standpoint, they are looking for diversity at the grad level as well. And so it's going to be less competitive for you if you're coming out of a less selective undergraduate institution. Same is true of med school, for sure. Like med school is looking at your undergraduate GPA and your MCAT score, and that's all they care about. So if you have the ability to go to a little bit less selective school and really be a top performer, that's going to bode well for you when it comes time for all grad schools. But, med school is the one that is definitely most focused on the undergraduate GPA.
Are there any other questions that we can field?
I talk so fast and people are like,
yes. Can you please name several less selective universities that still provide merit scholarships that can cover a large portion of college cost?
I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the question.
Can you please name several less selective universities that still can cover a large portion of college cost with merit?
It depends on the profile of your student. So I hate to say it depends, but I think that DePaul University locally, like if you have someone that's a strong student, could essentially get a very large merit-based scholarship package from them. I think that if you look at some of the other schools, Illinois Wesleyan is another one fairly locally, that if you're a top student, that they are going to be incredibly generous from a merit scholarship standpoint. But it sort of depends where your student is on their profile, right? When we talked about looking at the mid 50% for what their GPA is and their testing, assuming they're looking at testing. The one thing I didn't mention that is important to note when you're trying to do that is the colleges, every high school has sort of a different GPA scale. The colleges, for the most part, are looking at everything on a 4-point scale. So you just need to convert your GPA, whatever your high school's GPA is, to a 4-point scale, because there's 100 different grading scales around the world. So the colleges have said, we're going to go on the 4 scale. And then what happens is they'll give you a half point back for honors classes and a full point back for AP classes. So if you're a straight A student that has taken, even on a 4 scale conversion, you're going to be above 4 right? Because you're getting add backs for honors and AP classes. So when you're looking at what their mid 50% is, and you're trying to understand the merit, I think that's probably an important thing to look at, is where your student falls in their profile. I hope that answers.
I have another question regarding extracurriculars. How highly regarded is band, especially if you're a standout? What are top curriculars that get attention of colleges? Are there certain types of activities you should be sure to have?
I would say that for the most selective colleges, well, let's do the band thing first. So I think band is highly regarded as an elective, but I think sometimes students take it for the wrong reason. They take it because they feel like it's an easy honors level class. And based on what I just said about the colleges recalculating it, they're going to recalculate it on the 4, and then the other calculation they're going to do is on the core classes. So they are most focused on your core classes. So if you're passionate about band and it's really what you are pursuing, you obviously want to continue to do that. Some students stay in it because they think it's going to help their GPA, and ultimately it does, but the colleges are going to discount that when it comes to evaluating the core. I think from an extracurricular standpoint, what I find is, rather than any set one activity being important, it's understanding that leadership is one thing that's very important. The level and depth of engagement is another thing that's really important. And I would say the third thing is having your application have some, I like to say theme, but like thread that sort of weaves throughout. So let's use an example. Your student is pursuing computer science as a major. Then you want to make sure that their extracurriculars that they're involved in at the high school relate to that, right? A couple of the STEM clubs, maybe robotics, they might be doing anything in that space. Then their volunteer work could be rebuilding computers for, I have a student that's rebuilding computers for a women's shelter that, doesn't have a budget. So he gets computers donated, he gets people to donate money, and he rebuilds the computers and then donates them. That is like a standout project for someone that is in STEM. So working to kind of understand what the activities are that are impressive, and the extracurriculars for that standout is driven a lot by what your student is interested in pursuing, because by tying it together where there's sort of a commonality to what they're doing, it really helps their applications shine. I think sometimes students suffer from just registering and being involved with a million different things that don't connect in any way, and they don't have depth of involvement with any, and there's also very little connectivity, and then no leadership either. So hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. I've got a couple more questions. Do you have any pointers on essay for these days?
Yes. View it that it's a marketing piece for you. It's the only opportunity that you have to get out in front of the admissions rep that's reading it. So the admissions team will spend about 6 to 8 minutes on your entire application. So that's, test scores and transcripts and the application. So the essay becomes about you standing out. I often tell my students the goal in high school is to blend, right? Everybody wants to blend and not stand out. The goal on your essay is to stand out. So the brainstorming with your child, or just going through a series of questions to help figure out what's unique about them and makes them special, and then writing in it in sort of a captivating way. So sort of having a moment can be helpful. I like to tell students, think about it in terms of like, what happened and why does it matter? And kind of like the colleges will say jokingly sometimes, right, when I'm talking to them, is like, why do we care? Why is this? But they're reading so many of these things. I mean, if you think about that, if you're every 8 minutes, so it's like 7 packages an hour, basically, you want to be the one that they remember at the end of the day. And I had one rep say, the student that I'm talking about to my family at dinner that night is the one I'm going to remember. And that's sort of what you want. So it doesn't have to be you cured cancer or some amazing thing, right? Like I have people write about really, really basic things, but it's how you write. You want to be able to demonstrate your values through this, what's important to you. So I tell people the topic is sort of like the frame of the picture, and then who you are and the values in the context of the story are the painting. So hopefully that helps. That's sort of the.
I think that's good. One more last question. Is religion considered a core or non-core class in terms of GPA calculations? In other words, would a religion grade hold less weight than English, math, science, and history?
Yes. It'll definitely, so when they recalculate, they're going to recalculate on just the 4 math, science, social studies, and English. And then so religion would be in the total, cumulative GPA, but on the core calculation, it would not be included. So hopefully that, I don't know if that's good or bad for your student, if they're a good religion student or not, but it is definitely not one of the core classes. And I will tell you that for foreign language, some of the universities view that as core, so they might add that into the calculation, and some do not. Foreign language, as long as I mentioned it, soapbox is like, the high schools only require the 2 years, and some people will say, oh, my student had it in middle school, so technically they already had Spanish 2 freshman year and they're done. The reality is the colleges want to see it's a very international world that we're in now, right? So they want global perspective. They want students coming in that have the ability to speak a second language and be fairly proficient. So the more foreign language, some students just absolutely detest it, and I understand that. So at least get your 2 years in high school, preferably more, assuming you had it in middle school. And middle school is usually 6th through 8th grade, at least in this area, turns out to be, Spanish 1 or French 1. And then at the high school, you start freshman year of Spanish 2. So technically like 3 years, but some of the universities, liberal arts college, even at University of Illinois, which is if you're doing economics or chemistry or something like that, they actually want 4 years to graduate. So if you had 4 years before you get to University of Illinois, you completely waive out of all that. So that's kind of a nice perk. So I tell students, sometimes it's worth it to just sort of dig deep and get through it in high school, and then you can be done with it too. So.
Great.
Yeah,
That is all I have. We have a couple of comments. Excellent presentation. Little realistic. It's a reality check for some of our attendees. A little anxious, provoking, but realistic. So.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I appreciate it. And I think the one thing I forgot to say, because I always get so busy and getting through all of the points, is it's supposed to be fun. And I know Susan's daughter is going through it now. And it really, the bottom line is it's like the first opportunity that you really have to start thinking about what the next chapter is going to look like for you as a student. And if it's parents on here for, your child. So approach it from the perspective of, upbeat and having fun with the process, and obviously establishing a budget early on so that you're not ending up applying to schools that are out of your budget. That would be important. But thank you. I appreciate it, Susan. And thanks so much for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for everyone for coming. And I will be sending out an email tomorrow with an evaluation, and hopefully, Kim, you'll be willing to come back and maybe do financial piece.
Yeah, I was going to say, as I was talking, I feel like, and it is, you could go so deep on all these topics. So that would be fun. You had to do another future one on the financial process and, the financial aid and more about merits. And yeah, that would be a great topic.
Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.